Thank you, Chandrika, for the kind introduction, and thank you so much, IAC, for all the hospitality, and really, it's a very good experience. This team is really, really strong, and I'm really feeling privileged to be here. So, so a lot of what I have been doing in the last 13 years is really about understanding autism and trying to do something about it, and hopefully there's going to be good outcome. And let me go back here. So initially, after my son's diagnosis 13 years ago, I thought, because I am really an engineer at heart, I thought I would try to understand what's going on biologically, and then maybe I can figure out how to treat autism accordingly. And very soon I figure out that it's not really that simple. Autism is very heterogeneous, and I at some point just feel like this is the best thing to do something that can benefit my son and also others like him a little bit more readily, and that's why I'm embarking on this project just about 2.5 years ago. So I'm going to talk about neurodiversity, and I'll talk about the strength-based model and what we are doing at Stanford, and then pose the question to you: how do we work together? So neurodiversity has been used as a term some 20 years ago, more for autism, and now we are really trying to redefine neurodiversity as really a different concept. It's not neurodiversity is not equal to autism. We are talking about neurodiversity as just another diversity. We want to consider individuals with differences in their brain function and behavior as part of the normal variation of the human population. I think some other speakers have talked about there's about 2% of us now who is on the spectrum. And there are other conditions that are considered as neurodiverse. I'm not going to talk about them today, but dyslexia, 13 to 14%, and ADHD is 5 to 7%. So if you're thinking about brain differences, behavioral differences, it's really the biggest minority of our world population. I think most of us, or maybe all of us, know about the bell-shaped curve. For any trait, in the green zone is where most of us are. We are in the average zone for the most part, but sometimes we are good at something in particular, and maybe we're going to be in the yellow zone on your right-hand side. And if you're really, really good, like representing your school and maybe even more than that, then you're in the red zone on the red. But if you're not so good on that particular area, then you'll be on the yellow zone or red zone on the left. So a lot of the time when we are looking at abilities, we use IQ. So the green zone between 85 to 115 IQ would be the average. And when someone has 130 IQ, we think that person is really smart. And if someone has 145 IQ, that will be 3 standard deviation above the mean, and that would be considered as genius. On the other hand, someone that has an IQ of below 70, that person will be considered as having intellectual disability. But this is only one way of measuring abilities. Howard Gardner at Harvard University thought that this is really more helpful for us to think a lot more broadly. So in addition to the visual, spatial, verbal, linguistics, the logical, mathematical abilities that the IQ tests have always been measuring, he has also put in there the musical, rhythmic, bodily, kinesthetic, naturalistic, interpersonal, which is the abilities to relate with other people, and intrapersonal is more for the ability to understand himself or herself. And there's also the naturalistic ability. Another speaker yesterday spoke about the pet therapy, and in many ways, the kids that are working well with pets, they may actually have good naturalistic ability. So we can think of those 8 domains with some people that we know very well. So for Einstein, for example, we think he is going to be above average in musical abilities. At least he played the violin. Spatial, he is going to be kind of way up there. Verbal linguistics, not so good. He actually didn't speak until 3 to 4. Logical mathematical, above everybody, 15 standard deviation above the mean. Naturalistic, probably average. What do you think his intrapersonal abilities? Probably in the yellow zone. And maybe, how about interpersonal, relating with others? Maybe in the red zone on the left. Bodily kinesthetic, he is probably average, at least he ride a bicycle. So when we think about Einstein, we remember him as someone that has changed the world because of his abilities to understand the world very, very differently. And we don't remember him as someone that is not very good at relating to people and so forth. So basically, thinking about focusing on the strength of that person can really potentially grow that person and create a healthy identity. So who has heard of the name Stephen Wiltshire? Anybody? So there are a few people. So the next video is going to be about Stephen Wiltshire. This is for, can you press the button?
Detailed and intriguing images of cityscapes from around the world have made Stephen Wiltshire famous internationally. A selection of his work is on sale at his London gallery. A drawing by Stephen Wiltshire can cost anything between 1,700 and 200,000 euros.
I'm really satisfied for my work because I will like the way I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it my way.
Stephen Wiltshire is a born and bred Londoner, and the city is a constant source of inspiration to him. He sometimes takes photos of views that speak to him, but he draws and paints from memory.
It's so beautiful out there because I can see the London Eye, and I see the half of a county hall, and Hungerford footbridge, and a bit of a medieval Royal Festival Hall.
Back in his studio, with the views still fresh in his mind, Stephen Wiltshire begins drawing Westminster Bridge.
I love doing some work and then I memorize it because it gives me a hard work and love my job. Sometimes I do some quick sketch of it and much for very natural, but not just going to be detailed this time because very bit of a quickie sketch.
A quickie sketch that is astonishingly detailed. A true-to-life snapshot of the world as the artist sees it.
I think the important stuff it means I have to concentrate it and realize and to memorize it by my mind.
Stephen Wiltshire was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. He began drawing when he was 5. His talent was immediately obvious. He won a series of art competitions, went on to graduate from art school, and is now a celebrated artist and draftsman with an international reputation.
I think I might get better doing drawing if I like it to do it, must doing the best, and I'll never stop.
Stephen Wiltshire often takes helicopter trips over cities, storing what he sees in his memory and later recreating the view in the form of gigantic panoramas. Here in Mexico City, he spent several days on a panorama of the city, working in full view of the public. Around 100,000 people came to watch. Meanwhile, he's worked all over the world.
Like New York is my best place, and looked about many times, or about 8 times, I think. And I've been to Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and I've been to Tokyo, and some lots of places in there, and do some panoramas.
This summer, Stephen Wiltshire will be visiting Los Angeles, one more city to cross off his list.
So this is Stephen Wiltshire, and we can also try to understand what his multiple intelligence profile, and if we think musical, maybe he's on the average side. Visual, spatial, he's definitely way up there. He's really visualizing the world very, very differently, and his memory visually is just not like anyone. How about verbal linguistics? He's probably below average. And logical mathematical, he's probably on the average side, naturalistic average. Intrapersonal and interpersonal, not so strong. And bodily kinesthetic, most probably on average range. So when we remember Stephen Wiltshire, we remember his artistic abilities and how he is really visualizing the world in a very special way. And he actually got the opportunity to have the elaboration and the learning of how to express himself early on, and that's because his parents are really trying to give him opportunities to do something that he's very good at. So focusing on his strength and interest, just like what Dr. Temple Grandin yesterday was talking about, and Rima was talking about focusing on strength. Dr. James also talked about focusing on identifying the strengths. This is really not something new. This is something that we should be doing, but we are not doing enough of it. And the next slide, I'm just going to show you that there is a really large number of very remarkable people who are really changing the world. And they are not only changing the world in the sciences, they also do things in different areas. Like this person over here is Elfriede Jelinek. Actually, she's she's one of the first patients, one of the first four patients that Hans Asperger's described in his first manuscript. She won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and she had a lot of problem when she was growing up. And there are people like Greta Thunberg here. She's on the front cover of the Time magazine this year, and I saw this picture right outside, and this person is the creator of Pokemon, Satori Tajiri. So when you're thinking about individuals on the spectrum who may be having different having different strengths and interests, they can be really varied. It can be in the sciences, can be in the arts, it can be almost anything. So please do not really limit their abilities. Go with their strengths and interests. I'm not going to spend too much time on the definition of autism. I think we all know about how it is defined. And what I want to contrast is really with the same characteristic. We can think of challenges and strengths. Perseveration, cognitive inflexibility is something that is very common in individuals on the spectrum. But you can also see that as persistence, depending on the context. Seeing big picture is a challenge for individuals on the spectrum, but if you're trying to get the person to be responsible for a task that requires details, then you have the right person. You don't really care about someone that needs to debug a program, for example, to see the big picture. That person needs to know the details. They usually have fewer interests than others, but when they are interested in something, they develop such deep knowledge, and that's why they can really solve problems that others would not be able to care. Perspective taking is a problem, but they're usually very concrete and honest. Social interactions not so easy for them, but when they have friends, they tend to be very loyal. So you can see that all of these descriptions of autism, they are really all the same characteristics that we are talking about with individuals with autism. But if you're trying to help them to focus on things that will develop their strengths, their trait would become a strength. So basically, this is the main point that I would like to bring out, and neurodiversity can become a competitive advantage. The strength-based model is very different from the disability model. So I'm a physician by training, and all of what I learned in medical school is really about how to identify the deficits so that we can understand the disability and then we treat the disability. It's very different from the strength-based model when we are focusing on how to characterize their ability hyperfocus or attend to details, understand their deep interests, their fund of knowledge, and there are many other strengths that we can really understand more when we're trying to understand the patient. And like I said, the strength-based model is really not anything new. Even Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger, when they first talk about their patients, they talk about, like Leo Kanner has 11 patients that he first described. 54% have very good memory. 36% of them have good musical abilities. And you can see that later on there are many others that have characterized the individuals on the spectrum, and they have a wide variety of strengths. So there is something called perceptual peaks. Basically, is kind of the relative ability to perceive certain things much better than their cognitive ability. So there's a little bit of a statistical meaning behind it, but the main point is that in the typical control, most of us, only 13% of the people have more perceptual peaks, but in the autistic population, almost two-thirds. There's a test called block design. Basically, this is a way to characterize visual spatial strength. In the neurotypical group, it's only 6%, but autistic population, more than sixfold higher. And pitch discrimination basically is the ability to identify a pitch when you have another known pitch. And you can see that the neurotypical has only 9%, but the autistic population is 47%. And there are other data from others that talk about like absolute pitch, for example, the ability to identify the pitch without even a reference note. That's very rare in the general population. It's 1 in 10,000, but in the autism population is 1 in 20. So you can see that the strength of individuals on the spectrum can actually be characterized, and it's been talked about. Strength-based model of neurodiversity, as we are trying to practice at Stanford, we focus on 3 major key components. One is a positive psychology. positive psychiatry is the second one, and then Chickering's 7 vectors of development. I'll talk a little bit more about these components a little bit later. And when we are practicing the strength-based model, we want to emphasize that we want to consider the neurodiverse conditions as conditions rather than disorder. And we want to acknowledge that individuals on the spectrum has challenges, but we don't want to call them deficits. We want to say that they are only challenges. Because if you are trying to groom these people in the right direction, they may actually turn out to make their challenges become their strength. So that's why we don't want to label them as deficits. And if we are good at what we are doing, we are going to be able to apply the strength-based model across the entire spectrum. Positive psychology was initially introduced by Martin Seligman and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and they will talk about really focusing on helping patients to focus on well-being, contentment, satisfaction. Flow is basically immersing oneself in the work and get satisfaction out of it. And they want to focus on happiness, hope, and optimism. And in the last 20 years or so, this paper has been cited over 16,000 times. And a lot of people are trying to really redefine what positive psychology may mean, and there are 53 published definitions. There are 3 main ones that are the most popular, but instead of reading out all of the words, basically, it's really about strains, about happiness, and about growth. I'm traditionally trained as a traditional psychiatrist, so to speak, and but I want to also contrast what positive psychiatry can be in comparison to traditional psychiatry. So as I said, the deficits, pathology is what we typically are taught, and research focus is really about risk factors and pathology. But in positive psychiatry, it's really about focusing on positive attributes, strains, protective factors, and even neuroplasticity. Treatment goals is really about symptom relief by medications and short-term psychotherapies, but positive psychiatry is about really increasing well-being and growth by psychoeducational interventions. Traditional psychiatry really is very reactive. There's not a lot of preventative measures, but positive psychiatry is really all about about prevention, and prevention across the lifespan. The 7 vectors of development basically are the developmental tasks that we would like to focus on. And they include developing competence, managing emotions, moving through autonomy toward interdependence, developing mature interpersonal relationships, establishing identity, developing purpose, and developing integrity. When we are trying to develop our programs at Stanford, basically we will look at these 7 vectors and then ask 3 questions. First is, what do we need to do in order to educate neurodiverse individuals so that they can accomplish these developmental tasks? The second question is, what do the people in the environment or in that are closest to them that can actually make changes, like in school, what the school officials, the professors can do, and the workplace, what the employers can do, and so forth. And then the third is to ask the questions, what do mental health providers do in order to help neurodiverse individuals to achieve these developmental tasks? So very quickly, I'm going to talk about the Stanford Neurodiversity Project. Our main, the core thing about Neurodiversity Project is not really just about Stanford. We are really trying to demonstrate that we can make our organization embrace neurodiversity And we want to set an example. If we can do things right in our university, then that means we really live what we believe. So the first thing is really about changing the culture. If we don't change the culture, then there's really no possibility to embrace neurodiversity. And we want to empower neurodiverse individuals to build their identity through and enhance their long-term skills of daily living throughout their lifespan. And if we are doing it right, then we can attract neurodiverse individuals to come to Stanford to study and work. And we also want to train other talented individuals to be involved in this effort. And if we do everything right, then we can disseminate the model as widely as possible. And ultimately, we want to maximize the potential of neurodiversity, not only for the neurodiverse individuals, but really for all of us, because there's so much neurodiverse individuals can bring to the table. So we have a team of about a dozen of us. About 4 of us are full-time. And we have a few individuals that are very senior, and they also advise us. And we also train some peer mentors to help our students. There are 4 tenets in our project. The first is education. Educating not only the neurodiverse individuals, but the general public as well. And there is a service component. We want to help individuals on the spectrum to find employment, as well as helping them to get services for mental health support, for example. We work with companies. We work with our law school colleagues on advocacy issues. And we also do research to make sure that whatever we are doing is actually something that we can stand behind. And our project has 3 major initiatives. The first is awareness and education. The second one is neurodiversity at work and wellness. And then the third is neurodiversity independent living skills. So about 2.5 years ago, we started this project as a special interest group for neurodiversity. Initially, there are only 5 of us. All of us are staff and faculty members, and we want to invite other people at Stanford to join us. And very quickly, our first meeting, actually, we got 23 people showing up. And over time, we grow, and now in our distribution list, we have over 350 people. So it's grown quite a bit in the last 2 years. And every month we invite someone to talk about one aspect of neurodiversity. It can be about employment or student support or mental health support and so forth. So every month we bring in someone, and we are continuing to bring in someone, and some people call in even from Australia and the Netherlands, because there are some very good speakers that we have. And this is kind of the first step of bringing the awareness of neurodiversity to campus. And I talk very broadly locally and at other places in the world on neurodiversity. And basically, we just want to get neurodiversity into the DNA of our university, and even broader. And therefore, it's very important to work with corporations. So the next slide is basically an example of what we are doing. Is one of the examples of what we are doing at Stanford. And in this particular case, is about helping our students to live on campus by teaching residence assistants to help them.
My freshman year, I was in Cedro.
And this is Isabel, who is
Wiltshire
on the
dining.
spectrum.
We just had a table, like a long table that we sat out for meals. I mean, it wasn't compulsory, but the RAs, I don't know, I think that was their way of like community building. Like, we're going to sit at this table. It just means that there's a lot of people close to you because there's not a whole lot of space. And everyone's talking across, and there's just a lot of things that I would only go to like my dining hall because I didn't want to, like, even just like a new layout. Like, I would just kind of wander around and like be really overwhelmed. So I like do the same thing every day, like have my routine. But I felt like, okay, I guess I should be social and talk to people maybe, even though I didn't like it. Pretty quickly I realized I was just going to sit in the corner by myself and eat my food and get out of there. Because of like sensory things, I can kind of get pushed into like a meltdown because I can't like escape the bad sensory input. I had a really bad interaction my freshman year during NSO with RAs who decided things were a crisis and everyone got less and less and less information, and then they couldn't make decisions, and so then no one listened to me, and I was like, this is ridiculous, you can't make decisions or listen to me. The biggest thing is the lack of information. Once you tell the people, this is what is likely to happen, this is what I need in those instances, here's how you can help me, here's what you do not do, everyone's been super on board with it, my RFs, everyone. But without that information, they're going to assume whatever they've been given in training. And so if they haven't been trained in anything related to neurodiversity, if someone's crying and biting their hands and is not responding to you verbally, that looks really scary, understandably. But I haven't had experience where I've like explained this to an RA and then had them not respond positively. Taking away some of the like imposition on the neurodiverse person to have that conversation, like it wasn't a comfortable experience for me. Like I was probably pretty like anxious, like sitting through this meeting knowing like, okay, I'm gonna go talk to my RF, like I had emailed him before and asked to like set a meeting. But if there's like more awareness about that, or even like RA is just saying like creating an environment where it's like, hey, if you have things you want to tell us, or fill out this form, and that can be a way to facilitate those conversations, especially if you don't realize that that might be a good thing to do ahead of time.
I was wondering if there were any like structured dorm activities that were helpful.
I pick and choose. Like if there is an activity that is not necessarily just social based, like there are other humans around. But trivia, you're just asking me a question and I'm like writing my own answers down. I don't really, there's not a whole crosstalk happening. But you still get that like social interaction and like laughing about things that you're end up like you accidentally have a conversation rather than the point of being a conversation. And so there are things that RAs are already doing. But I think like being really intentional about that is like a good thing to keep in mind.
You just heard from neurodivergent Stanford students with different
We can stop the video. The video has another 7 minutes or so. So basically it's a video that we created through a design thinking course. And the students actually created that to focus on helping the neurodiverse students at Stanford. There are about 90% of the undergraduates on campus who are living in the dormitory. So basically, the people that are most able to change the environment would be the residence assistants. And that's why we are focusing on training them. And we train them by using the video, as well as we train them in a live demonstration. And this academic year, we trained 275 of them all in one day. So this is the first time that there's any neurodiversity training on campus at Stanford. So what we were trying to do also is to build a neurodiverse student support program. So we launched this program in the summer in 2019. And basically, there are many components, and you can see in this figure the red circle is the transition, and then there's independent living skills and social life, and they are basically supported by the peer mentors that we train. And the students also need support in accommodations, learning, and career development. They also need mental health support. So basically, we have all the different components that we can refer them to. We also teach a course, a seminar course, to help neurodiverse individuals to know about the different aspects like disclosure, about independent living skills, and we basically do that in a class setting. And that's in addition to the peer mentors meeting with the students at least once a week, and we have a curriculum that includes 100 items covering all different aspects in campus life and so forth. So we are hoping that in the 4-year time that the students are at Stanford, we're going to be able to cover all 100 items. So each student basically would have 2 support circles. One is the academic life support circle, and the other is the non-academic life support circle. And you can see that there is a SNP staff, which stands for Stanford Neurodiversity Project staff. Basically, this person is responsible for making sure that all the people that are supposed to be supporting the student, they are really doing their job. And we are using an application called Life Sherpa. Basically, all the users, basically like the mentors and the student, they get a lot of the information through the application, and we also track their feedback, like how good they think their interactions are between the mentors and the students and so forth. So we have some quality assurance that way. We also have a Neurodiversity at Work program, and the main reason why we want to make sure that the neurodiverse individuals are able to get work. Some people may think that they can get, students at Stanford, for example, they won't have any problem with getting a job. That's not true. There are some PhD students at Stanford that are really, really smart. They cannot get even interviews, and when they get interviews, they get written off very quickly because of their social interaction problems. So basically, because of that, overall, there's about 80% unemployment and underemployment for individuals on the spectrum, and that's why we need to build this specialized employment program. So basically, we receive a grant from Autism Speaks now that charge us to facilitate the hiring of 80 people on the spectrum in the next 3 years. And the way that we do it is by creating a candidate registry that you see in the brown. And after recruiting the candidates when they are job ready, then they get into the matching pool. If they don't if they're not job ready, then they are going to be sent to pre-employment training or internships so that they can be job ready. On the other hand, the companies and the employers, they can put their jobs into the job bank. And when the jobs are neurodiversity friendly, then they will be put into the matching pool. And if they are not, then basically our group will be helping the employers to gain their competency in best practice for neurodiverse individuals. So when the candidates and the employer found a match, and the employer wants to interview the candidates, we would help to negotiate for accommodated interviews. So examples of what we are doing is, say we ask the individuals that are interviewing to provide their questions ahead of time, and basically the candidates would also do the same. So when they are in their interviews, all the people in the interviews actually have seen the questions and they prepare ahead of time, and they are going to focus on the fit of the qualification to the job requirements. So all the open-ended questions are going to be discouraged. We basically just ban all the open-ended questions like tell me about yourself, tell me about your 5-year goals and all that. So all of that are considered not legal questions in our process. So this way we can help the employers to focus on what the candidates are good at technically. And then we help the candidates as well as the employers along the way. And when companies work with us, there are, in addition to the employers at Stanford, we also work with the companies outside Stanford. And what we do is we first go to the company and do awareness training. And a lot of the time, at some point, some managers are able to say there are some positions that they think is appropriate and for neurodiverse candidates to apply. Then we're going to be helping them to look at their position, their posting, and try to tailor it so that they are going to be suitable for posting to neurodiverse individuals. Because neurodiverse individuals are very much black and white, that's sometimes having a lot of the extra stuff that's not necessary can actually get the neurodiverse individuals to not even apply for the positions because they think they cannot do the work. And we also do best practice training, like interviewing and overtime, and if the candidates are in the right position to get an offer, we continue to work with employer, and when they are given offers, we are able to help form the support circles. So that's 5 minutes, okay. And after onboarding, we are able to create an environment for them with the support system that the employer and the employee needs. And then what we do is the first 12 weeks, we are going to have the weekly meetings with the neurodiverse individuals as well as their employers and the co-workers to help them with figuring out how to transition during the first 3 months of employment. So this is a very similar support circle, just like the student case that I showed you. I'm not going to spend much time on this. Basically, what I want to tell you is neurodiverse individuals can offer so much to organizations, just like what Dr. Mayo was saying, they can do so much. Neurodiverse individuals have specific challenges that can be overcome. We are not saying that we are only looking at their strengths, because when they have challenges, we need to do something about it. We want to focus on using the strength-based model in a very systematic fashion. Especially when you're building the program, that's the best time to insert components to make sure that you're covering all bases. And we want to maximize the potential of neurodiversity by practicing this strength-based model. So how can we maximize the potential of neurodiversity? You can join our special interest group. So we meet monthly now at on the third Monday of the month. Pacific time is 4 p.m. So that means it's 7:30 a.m. Indian time. So if you wake up and you want to call in, that's fine. We have people that actually call in from Europe, and that's like midnight their time. And let us know about your interest in neurodiversity. Let us know if neurodiverse individuals you know are looking for employment. This is more like easier for us for the positions that are in the United States. And introduce us to organizations interested in learning about neurodiversity. And introduce us to organizations interested in hiring neurodiverse individuals, and tell us about how you want to be involved. By working together, we can make a difference to the neurodiverse community and beyond. Thank you.